the other part was the IT department had a lot of downtime originally. And as everyone knows, one of the real reasons to move towards virtualization is not just saving money, but actually things like HA and disaster recovery. And so they really have been tracking and reporting how well the uptime has worked since they moved there. So I love this story. There's several other stories, of course, in Italy, but this is the coolest one. So. Now, I wanted to just give you a little flavor for what we're doing across all of VMware. So I'm responsible for all of the product group direction. We have about 4,000 engineers that are all over the world now, mostly in Palo Alto, several in Europe, and quite a bit in Asia as well. And we talk about ourselves as focusing on 3 layers. And you might have seen this in various presentations, but the first layer, and the one that most people know about, is really around building a cloud infrastructure. And again, many of you know this very well, but I'll share a few of the highlights, and I also want to share what we're trying to deliver in our future releases. What is probably less of a focus here, and in fact less of a focus in most groups that I meet with, is how people are writing applications. But I want to spend a few minutes on this because I'm very sure that this is something about 3 years from now that will be on a lot of people's minds, is how do you write future applications in this world? And then my personal favorite space, because I actually use it and live it every day, is really talking about how people use it. So when I get asked, what does VMware do? The way I think about it is that the notion of cloud computing is changing everything. It changes where you run software, it changes how you create software, and it changes how you consume software. So where you run, how you write it, and where you consume it. And that's a pretty broad agenda. It almost covers everything that you can do in software. But it is really the focus areas. So I thought right now I would just go into a little detail on each of these and give you a little look at what's happening. So the most popular area is around how do we run the data center. And again, I'm sure you spend a lot of your time talking about vSphere and vCenter and vCloud Director. So I'm not going to go over how those products work. I think you know that fairly well. But I do want to share what I've said as the priorities for VMware R&D for the next couple of years. So we have, as you know, a pretty big release coming out towards the middle of this year. Some of you I know have been beta testing it. So that'll be a very exciting release that adds a lot. We are working on 3 releases at any given point in time though. So we're pretty much done with the release that ships later this year. We're far along on the next one, and then we've started on the one after that. So we have to keep it going like that. It makes it very confusing for me because I don't remember which feature I can talk about. But let me call out some very interesting highlights. So the first one that I think is very important is how do we make sure that virtualization is good for every application. So right now we're definitely at a point where the traditional enterprise applications run well. Still the big area that we hit at most companies is ERP systems and SAP and databases. Those are still, people are not yet getting a lot of them over in production. But we're on the right track. The performance is in good shape. And with the exception of Oracle, we have good support statements from most places. SAP themselves will be rolling out a lot of large initiatives as an example there. So it is definitely the case where all of the existing applications are on the path from a technical standpoint. But I get really bothered when I meet companies that have created clusters that are set for specific applications. And so right now, maybe a quick show of hands, does anyone have a high-performance computing cluster in your organization? 1 or 2? And how about, is anyone using Hadoop today? Looking at Hadoop a little bit? So really if you go to some of the bigger, so I spend a lot of time on Wall Street where a lot of the advanced technology happens. Almost every bank has a virtualization cluster. Many will have a server and a desktop virtualization cluster, but every one of them has a very large cluster that they use for high performance computing. Or they have one increasingly for big data. And so we have a very big mission that you don't need to have different clusters. You should be able to have one large cluster virtualized and be able to run all of these application types. So we spend a lot of time in the kernel making sure that performance overhead continues to shrink, and especially around network latency and around storage. So I think, I haven't written my talk yet, but at VMworld we'll announce a number of records in terms of how well you can do low latency networking. And that's important for things like message passing infrastructures. It's important for voice over IP. to make sure that all of the applications run very well on vSphere. So stay tuned for that. I should say also, it is VMware software, but a lot of it comes from hardware vendors who are now building things like SRIOV, if you've heard of that. Certainly Intel and AMD continue to add new features for us into their chips. So we'll be in very good shape, I believe, over the next few years so that people will run all sorts of applications there. The second one, this is the most important part. And in fact, I was speaking with my cousin earlier today, who does buy VMware software. He has to. But he has more budget than he has people. And so I started asking him, why would you use, he was looking at OpenStack and looking at KVM and other areas. But he found out that it would take him a lot more people to run these and get them set up in the first place. So what I asked him is, what sort of tasks do you do that require people? And this is something we try to do with almost every customer we meet right now. We ask, when does a person get involved with your virtual infrastructure? And as you see what we have today with vCloud Director, and especially what's coming next, as well as what's coming next with vCenter and all of these areas, automation is the real focus. Try to get rid of anything that a human has to do, and then only have humans involved when they need to be. So humans are not very good at repetitive tasks, and you shouldn't be. You should only get involved when you have to be. So I can't announce some specific things just yet, but know that pretty much anything that requires you to go to a spreadsheet right now, or that requires email to be gone back and forth, we're trying to automate that aggressively. Now the next one is not really very aggressively taking off yet in Italy. Some countries are further into the hybrid cloud model than others, but we do think it's a very important part of the future. So as you know, the real focus is to allow you to build a private cloud, and vCloud Director is the main focus there. 1.5 today and more in the near future. That really is about letting people have self-service access to infrastructure, have them be able to just log in and help themselves, certainly have good billing built into it. All of these are part of enabling a private cloud model. But what's also happening very aggressively, and I'll share some of the companies working with us, is the build out of public clouds using vSphere, vCenter, and vCloud Director. So I want to make it clear, we do this for two big reasons. The first is to give customers an option where they can run the exact same virtual machines, use the same management tools, even have the same security policy. But it's also about making our software better. So I spend a lot of time with AT&T and Verizon and Colt and very large companies that are running 100,000, 200,000 virtual machines. And when we go to them, they really force our products to have more scale. And I can promise you, if something's not automated, they learn about it quickly because of the large numbers. So we also use the public cloud to help the private cloud product get better. But a lot of what I'm working on in the group is also how do you begin to connect them in interesting ways. And people always ask me, what does it mean to have a hybrid cloud? And almost any time you see a disaster recovery solution in place today, to me, that is the first hybrid cloud. You have two data centers that are connected in some interesting network and storage way, and you're able to have a policy that helps things move from one side to the other. So when I get asked about hybrid cloud, I think it's not just about some public cloud vendor and your local data center. It's even for companies that have two data centers or more of their own. How can you begin to use them more easily? So there's a lot of interesting things. At the end, we can talk about VXLAN and storage replication, but a lot of important technologies for how to connect different data centers together. And then the last thing I wanted to call out is some new investments that are not yet really talked about too publicly, but it certainly is the case now when you go out and you talk about virtualization, it always starts with server consolidation, a way to save money, but it very quickly moves to availability. So I'm very excited. We actually showed at the last VMworld how we figured out how to do SMP FT. So if you're aware of fault tolerance, it only allows a uniprocessor today, but we'll make announcements relatively soon around how we'll be solving it for SMP. A lot of people don't use it today because their applications need the multiple processors, but we figured that out. We're also spending quite a bit of time with our partners on taking the HA functionality and moving it to know about software running within the virtual machine. So today, it's very nice if your hardware dies that you can automatically restart a virtual machine somewhere else. but what if your application dies? So a lot of what we're looking at is heartbeats for applications and automatically restarting within a virtual machine when you need to.